Leslie Carr from the University of Southampton. The title of the talk is Mind the Gap. There's a big exclamation mark there, so I have to say it like that. Moving from aspiration to experience in UK institutional research data management. Leslie is a senior lecturer in the Web and Internet Science Research Group at the University of Southampton, UK, and a director of the Web Science Doctoral Training Centre. He's the director of ePrints, which I think we've all heard about. That's excellent. The first institutional repository platform established in 1999, which supports over 320 public repositories supporting open access, open data and open educational resources agendas. Dr. Carr is also the director of the ePrint Services, a spin-out of the University of Southampton that commercially exploits the open source ePrint software, providing repository services and training to the international research industry. In conjunction with the ePrints team at Southampton, Dr. Carr has led over 20 funded digital library and repository projects, including IDMB and Deposit MO. Please welcome Leslie Carr.
Please welcome Leslie Carr while he tries to remember how to use the technology. Brilliant. So, are people familiar with the phrase "mind the gap"? So there's a London Underground station, and we have this phrase "mind the gap" there, and it's in fact it's repeated on loudspeakers. Only it's not "mind the gap." It's certainly up to a few years ago it was "named the gap," and it's there because you have curved platforms and straight trains, and so there's this kind of gap between things that people might fall down. And in fact, I discovered a report in the Mumbai Mirror saying just how many people fall down their gap. And the metaphor I wanted to bring to mind was we've got this kind of e-research thing going on, this e-research train approaching the platform, and lots of researchers there, but waiting to get on, and enjoy the fantastic benefits. But there's kind of there's this difference between what we can offer and what they want, and we don't want people falling down and plummeting down this hole. And I don't know. Very few of these incidents are actually life-threatening, and I don't think anyone's repository has ever actually killed anyone. But there certainly can be an element of disappointment that goes on, or mismatched expectations, and we'd like to avoid people actually and their research plummeting down this hole. Anyway, so I'll just try and leave you with that picture. The openness agendas that repositories have dealt with, open access to educational open access to research outputs, publications, educational resources, and now research data. As I've come here in the research context and looked around, there's an incredible diversity of activity going on, and I've seen sort of all these different things being done by different disciplines and different subdisciplines, different research groups. And I suppose my interest is to see not just what's the sort of the diversity, but can we bring some, as it were, conversity? What can we do that will help us to bring things together? And one of the things is, I think everything that we try and do, all of our data requirements should be underpinned by an active preservation infrastructure with sort of curation policies and workflows, the stuff that repositories do. So I consider repositories to be tremendously important in this environment. Now, I happen to be particularly implicated with one particular type of repository, ePrints. The other repository platforms do exist, and I kind of want sort of the thrust of my talk here to be about sort of the importance of repositories and trying to span that gap, not any particular repository. So the scope, sort of a decade ago, we started off this piece of technology and the open access agenda, focusing particularly on research publications, and it's kind of expanded, that blue box. But there are other agendas going on as well. Sort of research is complicated and multifaceted, and it's not just about gathering the end results. Certainly in the UK, and I know in Australia as well, there's the whole issue of research management and research assessment that repositories have been involved in, looking for evidence of impact and keeping information about the research process, about projects. And I'd like to talk briefly about that. And finally, the actually being implicated in the research activity itself, not just coming along as being a place to dump material that you finished with, but actually to be part of the research process and to provide useful services there. So at Southampton and with JISC funding on a number of projects you can see here, we've been building up our experience. Datapool is the latest project where we're trying to provide for the whole institution kind of e-research repository, data management services, not just for individual disciplines, but that work well across a whole institution. That builds on top of a previous project we had, the Institutional Data Management Blueprint, which was looking at how this could, what recommendations you could make for a 10-year phased plan of how to put this in place. That built on Keep It project, looking at how to do practical preservation across different disciplines, across different interests. What were the steps that you could implement, and on the Deposit MO, the modus operandi project, looking at how you could bring users and their desktops closer to the repository rather than keeping them at the distance with a complicated metadata form to fill out. And that's built on top of the repository itself. The latest version of our repository, version 3.3, has this thing called the App Store, the ePrints Bazaar. The idea of that is very similar to an ordinary App Store, but you can produce pieces of increased functionality, and that you can share them, and they can be installed in your repository by sort of shared amongst the community, installed one click really easily, and we'll have a look at that as well, hopefully in my closing slides. E-research, when it comes to trying to make decisions about how you're going to store and manage data, you very quickly go into this kind of tug-of-war situation of, sort of with my semantic web informatrician hat on, kind of pulling for ontological exactitude, and we're really going to describe the data and sort of as fully as we can, so that we can have all sorts of automated processes working on it. We can have sort of RDF and Sparkle and OWL logic, and we can do we can do inference and the whole shebang. But as well, actually. Exactly the same people, sort of pulling in the opposite direction. It's pragmatic simplicity. It's how we're actually going to deliver this, and what are people actually going to be able to use at the moment, as opposed to what we think they should be using. So we've taken very deliberate steps towards pragmatic simplicity. So where it's very tempting to get very detailed and specific about subject classifications and descriptions and keywords and modeling of the metadata, we've really tried to pull back from there and have some very simple principles. So, and that is to say that at the moment we believe, when it comes to institutional repositories, when it comes to institutional activities, that metadata information really has to be mainly human-oriented and advisory. So all those lovely e-research and cyber infrastructure projects we have where sort of everything's kind of machine readable and can be executed and checked automatically, we've deliberately pulled back from that, simply to get people over the cultural hurdle of being able to describe their data and sort of take a cultured approach to it, to be able to curate it and to be involved in that process rather than presenting them as something that is really difficult. So in our repository we've introduced the notion of data-oriented records, things that, a data set, a collection of data, one-off independent collection of data, which contains one or possibly more data documents and possibly some information describing how to interpret those documents, where the metadata describes the process of collecting that data, or an experiment which is a structured process that may result in many data sets and has a sort of more complicated internal structure. So you have these data-oriented records in the repository, but also data-carrying records, which are just ordinary publications that can have data sets associated with them. But the key there is that the sort of the metadata, bibliographic metadata, is all about the publication, and any of the data sets that are concerned, that there's not so much information there about how they were created. And in the same way that you can have different kinds of publication, different kinds of content for your publications, you can have draft versions and post-publication versions. You can have supplementary material and presentation material that augments your publication. When it comes to data content, then we've just tried to distinguish, after talking to lots of faculties and looking at how to fit their requirements into a common kind of structure. You have data, the primary data, whether it's experimental results, equipment readings, or survey responses. You can have additional metadata, which is subject-specific secondary information about the conditions under which the data was collected. So if you imagine an electron microscope, you might have a spreadsheet which has parameters in saying what the focal length or the beam energy was in these cases. And so you've got specific information that's relevant to that particular experiment. And then finally you have what we call README information, which is just stuff for human eyes that gives them information about how to interpret the other things. And so putting those together, what we came up with from the Institutional Data Management Blueprint project was just something that tries to guide people into a balance between ontological completeness and sort of the simplicity. I think someone expressed it yesterday, of just being able to put their stuff somewhere. So looking at general metadata that describes sort of the bibliographic and project-related information, broad discipline metadata, and then really specific experimental metadata that is applicable to a particular methodology or a particular experimental activity, and where that goes and how it's done. So that was one of the outcomes of that project. So now I want to move to the different activity, rather than just say, oh, how do we deal with research data? What are we trying to do to span that gap? This is, in the UK, an enormous topic. So practically everyone's effort has all gone into research management and research assessment, because that's where the government's going to, sort of decide how to give us all our money. And so we've taken this idea from a European project of CRIS, the Current Research Information System, which pulls together the information from all across the different information silos in the university, from human resources and finance, the grants database, expertise database, and the repository publications that contribute together. And there's this data standard called SERIF, which helps to pull all the information together in a CRIS environment. And what's happened is that there have been a number of big companies, European companies, selling UK universities heavyweight CRIS environments to do all of their research information management. Institutional repositories very much come from the library. CRIS environments very much come from the admin. And so what we've tried to do is to take the repository and enable it to work in that environment. So as well as looking at publications and outputs, to be able to deal with information about projects and financing and grants and personnel and facilities. And so in the latest version of ePrints, as well as having data sets that look after publications and the various types of publications, you've got things for projects and for funders. And instead of a paper having a piece of text saying what the name of its funder is or what the name of the project is, you have a direct link to the project record in there. And we've done a lot of this work with Mary Davis who was at King's College in London and who's now at at UWA, and we're very lucky to work with her because her expertise spanned both the library and admin, as an information scientist and library. And so by pulling all that together, she led a big initiative in the UK to try and make sort of repositories relevant and the library relevant in this area, and that was really useful for us. And UWA's gain has very much been the UK's loss. And now finally, the final thing I wanted to mention was data collection. We have this problem with repositories. How do you get data in it? How do you get people to put your data in it? And we heard from Swinburne yesterday about, they talked about some of the problems that they've had in trying to engage their researchers with that. And so we thought, well, what if it wasn't somewhere that you had to go and put your data after you'd collected it and after you'd done everything? What if it was offering services where it collected your data for you, where it stood as an intermediary for you right at the beginning? And so we've taken a particular set of problems for social scientists. You've got your repository on the web. Social scientists want to be on the web. They see it as big data for them to study. Huge methodological challenges, but a real opportunity. And so we've been looking at how we can support our own researchers and our students in collecting data off the web, email forum contributions, sort of Google search results, looking for significant pages, YouTube videos, blog comments, tweets, Facebook entries, those kinds of things. I give this is nothing to do with our project. This is an email that came around from the Data Curation Centre in Edinburgh, who were promoting a talk that Anne Alexander was giving from Cambridge. She was talking about her research looking at social activities in Egypt, and saying that she was particularly looking at, at Facebook, people's Facebook walls and what was going on during the social unrest there. And the information she collected, she couldn't be sure it was going to be there the next day or in a year's time. And we thought, that sounds just like what a repository does. And so we've been trying to get into this area as part of our, the work that we're doing with web scientists, training them to analyze and use the web. And so we've built an initial tool that helps, that means that the repository will go away and collect tweets, microblogging status updates from the Twitter service. And you set it going and it'll collect them for you for a month, 6 months, a year. And it's not something you have to worry about happening on your desktop, and does this machine get turned off, or does it need rebooting or anything. It just keeps going. It's a safe service for you, and it puts that, because it's a repository, the data is safe and preserved for you. And so you can see there a page that actually has 500,000 tweets about Doctor Who, which is a personal obsession of mine, collected over a period of 6 months. And you can see that it combines some kind of rudimentary analysis and feedback for people who are engaging in a long-term. They don't want to come back in after 6 months and think, oh no, I got the wrong data. Oh no, you want to be able to see and analyse it as it's coming down. So there's some rudimentary information there. Goes to the ePrints Bazaar, as I mentioned, this one-click thing. And this brings me to the first keynote that we had. Apps as a repository, repositories as apps, apps for repositories. The thing about publication is everyone writes their papers pretty much the same way, but the thing about science is everyone does their science in a completely different way. And so I think we're going to need to see lots and lots of new applications coming out that mediate between, there's a helium ion microscope, that mediate between the workflows, the activities, the data gathering activities, and automatically create stuff using the SWORD protocol, our experience on the GIST Deposit MO project that I don't have time to go into, and put stuff into the repository so it's there, so it's safe, and you don't have to persuade people to do it for you. So final thought, final slide, just what is a repository anyway? In talking of these three agendas, aren't I muddying the waters? We knew what a repository was. It was a place to put your research publications. But in fact, that's a very limiting definition. A repository isn't just a piece of software that people deposit data in. It's actually, when you look around at everyone who's here and all the activities that are going on, it's a big socio-technological phenomenon. It involves librarians and researchers and a piece of technology and their communities, and it promotes a new relationship between all of those stakeholders and their information and their intellectual property. It involves international programs of advocacy, teams of librarians training people in information management. It involves personal engagement with end users. And that's why I think the repository has a lot to offer, because it's not just saying, here's a piece of technology, go away and use it. It's saying, here's an experience, here's a new way of doing science. Okay, thanks very much.
We have time for questions.
There's not a repository, a destination for publications and data, or is it to some extent a gateway? Because I'm interested in the amount of data storage you have to have. You're going to be storing all the data.
Yeah.
And just one other thing I want to say, that this year we've got a repository, and one way we're talking content about it, if the person has a researcher identity content, it automatically downloads all of their publications into the repository, so
Yeah.
that's actually something like that.
Yeah. Well, I think a repository should be a mixture of both. It should be a destination in the fact that you're collecting information and it's there and it's available through there. But it's also a gateway in the sense that services can get to. It's not a full stop. It's not the end of the line, but you can take it on from there and do other things with it. And I think that's important. But I also agree that I think that you should be able, and there are various there are facilities in our in ePrint for you to be able to batch import records from services like ISI Web of Science based on various criteria, and so that you can do that. Yes, but I think it should be a destination. Occasionally, it's going to have to just point to things that are in other places. That's fine. There's always going to be some kind of mixed economy. It's going to be a hybrid animal. But I think if you get it, if you lose sight of it as a destination, as a place where material is looked after, then you kind of lose some of the power of the engagement, I think. I think would I describe our approach to managing research information as archival? I think that the idea of archiving something, can sound as if it's the tail end of a long process, and I think that's what we're trying to move away from. I think there is that sense of preservation, but also for material that that is active and current, so that those Twitter things. For material that is ephemeral and changing all the time, you have to be archival from the moment it's kind of generated, and so you have to look towards that. And I think very much I take the point of view that preservation is an attitude that starts at birth and that keeps things available all the time, not just something that you kind of think, well, I don't know if I want this anymore, I'll commit it to the repository.
One more. You look at the research and research because they want private operations.
That they want what?
Private operations, they create change.
Yeah, okay. So the question was, do I ever get requests from researchers that they want to be able to do CRUD on their repository? And so most researchers don't know what CRUD is. But what you're saying is, can they use it as a live source of material? Can they actually work on it? And so we haven't had any of those requests, but I think we're aware that they might, and we're trying to work out how to do that best. We've had a couple of experiments that just don't work very well, but I think you have to work out what is the modus operandi of research, and is it going to be that there's one central store and every operation happens on that central store, or are there going to be, is there somehow a balance in which you have your local processing? I mean, again, it depends on the discipline. It depends on, you're never going to have local processing very much for, sort of petascale, activities. But for the majority, for the long tail of science, for sort of most of what happens, then the computational facility is going to be specialised. They're going to be in the labs and on the desktops of the researchers, and so somehow there has to be a negotiation between those two environments, I think. And so it's much more likely to be like the Apple iCloud model that people are talking about, where so you do stuff with in a specialized environment, but it's synchronized back to a storage. I'm saying that off the top of my head. I think that seems most likely at the moment.
Time there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your talk. Yes, thank you.